Well, the trade deadline is all over. It's in the book, so why not break it down with one of our favorites from The Athletic? You can also hear him on the Athletic podcast feed, the one and only Sam Amick. How you doing, Sam?
Good morning, guys. I'm doing good. I mean, it's post trade deadline day. Not as exciting as we thought, but there's always like this, on the other side of the mountain type feeling. So I'm good. I'm hanging in. How are you guys?
You know what's funny? He says not as exciting as we thought, and I don't know if it's just because we're like NBA nerds, and I'm sure in some ways you feel this too. Like, there's still a lot of movement around the NBA, even though they were tweaks, even though we didn't have all the fireworks. But I felt like a lot of the fireworks came early on in the season, and then yesterday, though, a lot of benefits to those tweaks.
Those were
for
like
these
Piccolo
teams.
Pete's. If you're
Oh.
fireworks early, Piccolo Pete's.
Okay.
Yesterday, maybe. Or sparklers.
That's good. Piccolo Pete's are good. Little, the snappers for the kids if you want to go
Yeah.
more. You know. No, I agree. I mean, it's funny because I always say, like, I tell people that, okay, you look to, like, fans, they look to us to tell them what's happening, right? And then I shouldn't admit this for my own, like, job security, but, like, people have to realize, we end up really understanding, maybe 5% of what's happening behind the scenes, which is to say that for me covering it, trade deadline day does become a bit of like, okay, we think we have a beat on this situation, that situation, but there's a bunch that might just come out of nowhere and shock you. This is not a trade deadline day example, but like when Damian Lillard got traded to Milwaukee, there were like maybe a tiny bit of chatter about that, but by and large, people were stunned. And so even though we cover this stuff all the time, that could happen. So on trade deadline day, you're thinking maybe that'll happen. It just didn't this time around. And it did, I used the word anticlimactic in my column, even admittedly as a bit of a smartass, had cited like the dictionary.com definition of it and asked a bunch of fan bases if it landed and resonated because, the five were, and we'll get into it, but like, your Kings were on there with Bulls, Hawks, Warriors, Lakers. And these are just like, regardless of what trades you think they should have done, that gap between the expectation of the fan base and the type of activity they might be ready for, and then what ultimately actually happens, creates that kind of anticlimactic finish. And that was really kind of what happened yesterday.
Yeah. I was like, clear my throat. I don't know why I said
It's a topic for you. I get
it. I felt like the Kings needed to do something. I wasn't expecting some big type of swing. I feel like those moves have already been made, right? Siakam, OG got moved. What do you think the Kings' approach to the deadline was, and why do you think they were maybe comfortable standing pat?
This is not what the Deuce and Mo pod wants to hear.
I want to hear the truth.
Tell us.
No, I'm still trying to learn about the truth. I don't totally get it. If there was a pivot, it seems, I don't know the timeline, but teams that had talked to them had come out, all through the process with the takeaway that, as you guys know, it was Fox, Sabonis, Murray, don't even bring them up. Everybody else up for grabs. The human component within that is like, all right, so now Kevin Huerter, Harrison Barnes, Davion Mitchell, they go to bed every night thinking, I might be moved. And obviously the rest of the guys as well. But then at the end, and I'm talking trade deadline day, and when the phones were still hopping, the way it was put to me was like, no, it's based on the market and based on what they saw available. It had literally become like we're not going to touch the top 7 approach. I mean, it's a big number, right? Like a really big number. And so that speaks to what sort of possibilities they saw out there, and one of my least favorite parts of the job is that we analyze, we criticize, we praise, and you try to do the best you can without all of the information, and that's just being honest about it. Like if you want to look at Royce O'Neal in Brooklyn, who I think probably tops the list of players that Kings fans and basketball fans say would have helped the Kings. I can't tell you with total clarity what it might have taken for them to get him, why they weren't able to pull that off. You look at the way he went to Phoenix, it was a pretty complicated 3-team deal where if you're trying to look for reasons to be understanding of the Kings, you look at that and you say, sometimes there's a whole thing happening over here that you're just not in on, and it's hard to get in on it. Like, that was a complicated deal with a fair amount of assets going in multiple directions that led to Royce O'Neal being on the Suns. The Suns have, I think, probably a different level of desperation to add help. If you were assessing the Suns and the Kings to get a guy like Royce O'Neal, just on balance, I think Phoenix is going to win that competition because Kevin Durant is the age he is. Bradley Beal is the age and health, history that he is. They have no depth. Their defense has been mediocre. So a lot of the same themes of the Kings, except for the age part, and Phoenix got it done. So I don't blame Kings fans at all for just being disappointed that there were no moves. I just would love to learn more about what was really, doable.
I want to go back to something you said. You said something about the top 7 approach. I'm not going to touch that. What do you mean by that?
Just that, like, when trade deadline day came and the calls were coming in, that it was like there was literally, it seemed as if there was nobody available to them that they deemed worthy of losing anybody in their top 7. So Malik obviously being first guy off the bench. Are we going Trey from there? Like, who's 7 on this team?
Right. I mean, that's I'd say Trey at this point. Yeah.
So that, with the starting 5 was like if Royce O'Neal cost you a top 7 player, well, we like what we have enough that we don't want to lose that. That also makes me wonder. I had somebody tell me recently that that one of the high profile guys, I don't want to put his business out there, but like that like, this front office is smart. You got to talk to your players. That they had gone to one of the Kings' top guys, and it probably went to both of them, and said, "What do you think about this guy?" And so they're having those conversations, right? And the part, and I don't mind sharing this part, the part where I was confused is that it was Kyle Kuzma, and this is like, maybe a month ago. And so there was like an internal debate about how would Kuzma fit in. Well, that became something that they didn't want to do. But it also, knowing that is the type of dialogue they have, it made me wonder yesterday, like, okay, like, I'm assuming the whole top 7 thing is probably at least partially born out of the core guys saying, I believe in Kevin, I believe in Harrison, I believe in, Trey, I believe in Malik. I mean, Malik's got his own lane because of his relationship with De'Aaron and whatnot. But it is admittedly just objectively hard to reconcile that with what I'm personally seeing on the court. Like, it's, they just got smacked by the Pistons. It's crazy. I keep saying this, you guys know, like, the history of the organization is such that, like, if I was a Kings fan, I would just be choosing to just have fun because they're winning games. You know what I mean? Like, they might be in the playoffs. That hadn't happened in 16 years, but that's, as you guys know better than anybody, that's not the mood right now. The mood is, how does our team get out of the first round? How do we get better? And if that's the calculus and the debate, we don't have evidence right now that they look real capable of doing that.
I think the other thing that I heard from some people yesterday is that everything around the league seemed extra expensive. Even if it was, I know the Hawks said DeJounte Murray was off the table and everything, but from leading up to that, seemed like it was going to take multiple first round picks. And then even when teams might have been talking about Alex Caruso with the Chicago Bulls, it seemed like it was going to take first round picks and just too much. And so I kept hearing everything is too expensive. And, you talk about the Kings in those top 7 guys and maybe feeling like they believe in them. Do you feel like that was just the pulse of yesterday? Like, there's so many sellers that were like dangling things in front of people being like, you have to give up your firstborn.
100%. I really do. That's a good point, Morgan. And it's funny because even like if you look at the format of the story I did, which I'd never done something like that before, but there was this, it was kind of easy to package these 5 teams that people thought were going to make moves and they didn't. Now, the distinction and the nuance within that packaging, again, Kings, Bulls, Hawks, Lakers, Warriors, is that if I'm actually being critical of the teams that didn't make moves, it's Bulls and Hawks, and then it's everybody else. So to your point, I don't understand why the Bulls looked at it and said, like, there literally was a report that they were having conversations about Caruso where they indicated that they might want more than 2 first-round picks. Like, what are we doing here? So, you have Kobe White, who's a wonderful part of your future. Patrick Williams on the last year of his deal. Lonzo Ball on the shelf for a long time. Alex Caruso is on a wonderful contract, but there's an 18-month window. He's not part of your future, most likely. And you had a great opportunity to get something for him. He chose not to. DeMar DeRozan is going to be a free agent this summer. Now, he might actually resign. That could happen. He likes it there.
Wow.
But they're going to really have to pay him. And so that, again, like I'm talking, like DeMar he's kind of like, I don't care about my age, to pay me for what I'm producing. And especially, man, LeBron's making everybody money right now. Because if you're 34, you could be like, hey, this dude out here doing it. So to your point about the price tags, it was Bulls and Hawks setting the market. The Raptors ended up doing stuff, right? Like not on deadline day, but they did break up their core. And their prices were, I think, more reasonable. The Pacers give up 3 firsts for Siakam, but they also have what appears to be a handshake deal that he'll return. So that's a long-term investment. The Bulls and Hawks just asking for the moon was a factor. And I will say, I guess, in a little fairness to the Hawks, I'm focusing more on Clint Capella, DeAndre Hunter, Bogdan Bogdanovic than I am Murray. I understand why. Like, if you look at Murray in the Lakers deal and you say a 2029 first, maybe a first-round pick swap, Jalen Hood-Schifino, and then D'Angelo Russell coming back. It's hard for them to think this way, but when you gave up 3 first and a first-round swap to get Murray in the first place, those 2 offers are just worlds apart. So I have some understanding for why Atlanta held steady. They've got multiple years on DeJounte's contract. They have time there. But the rest of it, they had pieces that could have yielded them something. But like a lot of these teams, appear to be a little delusional about what's worth holding on to.
Yeah, it just irritates me from the outside looking in with some of these teams. Because I don't know. I get the impression that nowadays it seems like some front offices want to win the deal instead of making a deal. Like they just want to be like, no, they want to be able to, at the end of it, be like, hey, look, go to their owner and show, look, everyone's talking about us. We won the trade today, as opposed to just like, no, let's just make a deal to improve our situation or our outlook going forward.
I agree. It's funny because in Vegas for the in-season tournament, I ran into Kevin Pritchard, the Pacers GM. And he's just a guy who's done it for a long time, did it in Portland and Indiana, is pretty respected as an executive, learned under Larry Bird in Indiana. And then, for the Sacramento crowd's purposes, was obviously a key figure in the Sabonis Halliburton trade. And talked to him about that trade a bit. And he had like such a mature perspective on that trade being a win-win for both sides. And that's kind of what you're talking about, is like, that did not strike me as a guy who's running around saying, to his owner, hey, I won the deal. He's been doing this long enough that it's okay to have win-win deals. And that is, people who work that way, I think typically can get business done more effectively, more consistently. I don't know who comes to mind as like the poster child for that sentiment in this trade deadline. I mean, you've got people like, I think it might not necessarily just be about, that many people trying to win it. It's maybe a little like Landry Fields comes to mind, the Hawks GM. You were the assistant GM under Travis Schlenk before. Travis had a bad falling out with Atlanta. You get the job. They added Chris Grant to the Hawks front office, an experienced executive some time ago. And there's another voice in the room. I don't know exactly where I'm going with this, but a young guy like Landry, who had a good playing career and is now a young executive, is he's going to have to pay attention to what his owner wants, thinks, and it's just maybe a little muddled with direction and voice and choices in that type of an environment. The Bulls thing, to keep focusing on those two teams that chose not to do much, and they kind of controlled the market in large part. Arturas Karnisovas, first-time GM from Denver, but more importantly, and I just said this on a different pod, Jerry Reinsdorf is 87 years old, the Bulls owner, and it seems real obvious, and I'm admittedly stealing this perspective from the legendary Michael Wilbon on ESPN yesterday, and Mike, with his Chicago roots, talked about how Reinsdorf, you're 87, you don't have time or energy to rebuild. You just want to watch your team have some fun, and the building is still full, and you're making money, and you got 6 trophies in your case. I'm not, I don't want to lose DeMar DeRozan. He's fun to watch. I don't want to lose Alex Caruso. That guy gets after it on both ends of the floor. So there's all these factors that come in on a day like that.
It's crazy to just put it that way. Hey, the boss wants to see this, so it's happening.
This is what. Hey, he's entertained.
I mean, he's entertained right now, and he's old. We're gonna keep this going. I want to go back to the.
Real to tie a bow on it. Like Indiana had that for a long, long time. And I honestly cannot believe that I'm blanking on the Pacers owner's name.
Herb Simon? Is that
Herb Simon? I kept wanting to say Herb Cole. That's the old Bucks owner.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. But Herb Simon's not a young man. And the Pacers had been towing the line in the middle for a long time with the same sort of chatter that in that market where folks just like basketball, they don't necessarily need to be in the conference finals or the finals. Sure, it was fun when Reggie Miller did it and Paul George was pushing the Miami Heat and everything, but you do for sure. I mean, you guys know this. Look at the Kings franchise and the way that the Maloofs and then Vivek Ranadive have impacted roster decisions at different times. It's absolutely a factor.
I want to go back to the Kuzma thing that you're talking about with Sacramento, because it seemed like at one point a couple of years ago, Monty McNair almost executed a trade with Buddy Hield going to the Lakers. Kuzma would have come to Sacramento. That deal ends up falling apart at the last minute because Westbrook ends up coming to LA instead. That deal just gets blown up. So they've been tied to Kuzma. Even during free agency, there was talk like, the Kings have interest in Kyle Kuzma. He elects to go back to Washington. And now we get past the trade deadline. It sounds like, the Kings didn't have any interest in Kuzma. I'm wondering, what changed? Was it the cost? What was it? The price tag? Was it? They watched him play in Washington the last year and a half and maybe feel differently now. What do you think changed?
So the ones watching on YouTube can see that I'm typing. I'm cheating and pulling up Kuz's basketball reference profile here to partially answer the question. I do think, the first comment I'll make is that agree or disagree, this front office is prioritizing shooting above all else and surround Sabonis and Fox with shooters. Now, those guys have not been hitting the shots like they did this year with Herter and Barnes and whatnot. But that remains a major priority. And Kuz, now this part hasn't really changed. So to your point, I think maybe strategy has changed more than Kuz has changed. But he's shooting at a 33.1% clip from distance this year at high volume, 6.8 3-pointers attempted per game. And, 33 is not efficient. 33 is Buddy Hield on a bad year. And I think that's it. They didn't see that as worthy of the contract and just didn't want the guy anymore. It's confusing because it does appear to it shifted pretty significantly. At the end, they were almost kind of really tired of hearing them be attached to that situation and wondering why that continued to get reported. But yeah, I think the shooting element is the big thing that if you're looking at job description of players the Kings are thinking of adding right now, that maybe even above, not maybe, their defense needs help, but they appear to be focused more on shooting. than the defensive side of the ball.
So they didn't see value in Kyle Kuzma, but they saw value in cash considerations yesterday, and that was the move that we saw for the Sacramento Kings. And I think the biggest thing, maybe even for fans, Sam, if you can explain why would the Kings be willing to even help out the Bucks in that situation?
I haven't looked at all the. I mean, I haven't broken that one down. I'm assuming it's just the Bucks create a list of teams, with a roster spot where they can get rid of a guy and do something that the Bucks aren't able to do on their own, and they're willing, for tax purposes on the Bucks side. I don't remember Robin's number, but like if they hold on to him, it's going to cost them X amount over and above his contract because of the significant tax ramifications. And then the Kings are doing them a solid by taking him, but the cash considerations, which I don't think that nobody really reported how much cash it was, did they?
I haven't seen it.
Yeah. I mean, if I was a front office guy or person, I would petition the league. Like, are there certain trades that we can just not announce? Like,
Yes.
like,
please.
I said the same thing to Morgan. Like, this is one where you're just like, why? Come on.
Let's just if Robin Lopez wants to tell his friends and family like what happened, that's fine, but because it just does create this. It's not only did you do nothing, but you had your hat out and you were begging.
At 11:58, that deal comes out too. It's like right before the Kings made it. Trade Robin Lopez? Or wait, what? And one other note, as we're recording this, the Kings did convert Keon Ellis's deal from a two-way contract to a standard contract. I don't know. Did some of that money help pay for that too?
Okay.
We'll talk again about it. I'll try to. I mean, in the cash, sometimes I wish I had a good example that comes to mind, but every once in a while, I remember hearing about different moves that like you'd hear how much cash it was, and sometimes as fans of media, we're all we care about is what happens on the court, but like this is real life too, right? So if the Bucks were like, we'll give you $7 million to take Robin Lopez, well, this is a business. Why would they say no to that?
Sam, but I always, you always say how 5% of this and that going on and everything, and I always especially on NBA trade deadline day, I'm asking Deuce the whole time. I go, well, what's their relationship with some of these organizations, some of these people behind the scenes? And I mean, something like this, you got to imagine too, if you help each other out and all those things, you build that relationship with an organization like the Bucks for future situations. You
do. Yeah, absolutely. It makes me think of the old days, Jeff Petrie, when he was running the Kings. Like if you studied his transaction history, he did a lot of business with the Atlanta Hawks. And that was, I think, was that Billy King was the GM at the time, but you had relationships where, and Jeff in particular, always struck me as like a very discerning, untrusting executive, like where in his mind, he woke up in the morning thinking that 70% of the league is kind of snake oil salesman trying to get over on me in a trade. But these other guys, like we talked about earlier, maybe I'll gravitate towards them to do business. And so he would do a lot of business with Atlanta. Those relationships do matter. I mean, it's why yesterday it shocked. This is a little bit in the same category, but shocked everybody when the Bucks got Pat Beverly from Philly, because that's got all kinds of layers to it. Like, wait a minute. So Daryl Morey, the head of the Sixers front office, fired Doc Rivers last year. That created acrimony that Doc actually spoke about on national television and took shots at Daryl. Doc is now the coach in Milwaukee, but they're going to give him a pretty decent defender because their defense is terrible. Like, help me understand the human dynamics there. So, yeah, I mean, that part I always love covering about the league, but it does maybe sometimes grease the wheels. The Bucks will remember that the Kings helped him out a little bit. And so that vibe could be a little bit different.
So if the Kings were just trying to go for role guys yesterday, you reported some names. You mentioned DeLon Wright, who the Kings, had a couple of years back. You mentioned Caleb Martin as a name, Royce O'Neal, Dorian Finney-Smith. I guess going back to Morgan's point, that the cost there was just too much. It was hey, we want one of your top 7 and picks.
Yeah, I mean that's again, I wish I had more for you guys on that
Yeah.
front. That's it. Is the top 7 as far as kind of like breaking down why this stuff didn't happen. I'm assuming each of those opportunities infringed on their other priorities that they deemed more worthy than that. It does feel like there is maybe, and this is kind of a informed speculation, but maybe kind of a 2-track thing happening here. Greater belief in what they currently have than we anticipated based on what they accomplished last year, in the way they feel about right here and now, even with things like the Pistons loss. I'm curious to talk to Mike Brown because, like a coach, every coach in the league post trade deadline, especially when you have talent on your team, which he is lucky enough to have some good talent. Like, I think a coach probably gets real excited this time of year because you get to have the noise totally gone about the trade deadline and players wondering if their families are going to get moved. And that part always gets overlooked, right? Like, people are like, oh, they make so much money. They still try to go to bed at night. They still only got, 16 hours in the day to get their work done. And if they think that their kids are going to be in school, one day and in a different school the next, that matters. And does that affect literally, the way you're fighting through a screen or the way you're going up for a jumper? Only those players know. So post trade deadline, that stuff is more settling. Like Damian Lillard comes to mind. This is super random, admittedly, but like Dame gave a really good interview recently to my buddy Vinny Goodwill from Yahoo Sports, talking about how he's going through a divorce and how like his mind is just not clear, and how people say that the court is a sanctuary where you leave your problems at the door, and that he wasn't feeling that this season, that he was actually in his head on the court because of real life. That's an extreme example because he chose to share what's going on in his life. But like the trade deadline has that kind of effect on a lot of players. So now the Kings have who they have. They have this pretty incredible fan base behind them that is, going to be out there. They're going to games. The energy could very, very easily swing in a very positive direction here if they put a run together. And as you guys remember, that's what they did last year. I remember going into the All-Star break last year for Salt Lake City, and our guy Anthony Slater, who well, like we had this funny running dialogue where like we would debate the Kings privately what we thought, and he was always like Mr. Rose-colored glasses. And I, even when they were like winning 5-6 in a row, I was like, nah, stop it. Like the floor is going to fall out, because that's what I'm trained to believe based on my history. And he's looking at it a little more clear-eyed because he's not been, watching what I've been watching so closely all these years. So all of which is to say, like, this team could still do it. I don't know what direction you guys want to go from here, but I do think defensively, man, I don't know what it is. Like, they just cannot get stops, And Sabonis in particular, real quick, like Sabonis having such a great year. I'm out of here on Twitter saying the dude should have been an all-star and getting killed for it by Laker Nation. And I believe it, but like the defensive stuff with Sabonis it's just tricky because rim defense is a problem. Obviously it starts on the wings, even Fox, who made great strides defensively, has not been quite the head of the snake that we thought he was going to become. That just remains a major problem.
Yeah, I think with the Sabonis thing, like, there's just limitations here. I mean, for as strong as he is, he's not the longest, right? Like, he's not going to be blocking shots left and right. You're banking on his verticality, the pick and roll coverage. Like, a lot of times, man, I don't put the blame on the defense with Sabonis.
Well,
he has shortcomings, but to me, it's about the guards defending, and De'Aaron, as he's made a lot of strides, and when he's locked in, it looks great. But Luke Laux was just saying the other day, they had to challenge him after the Miami game, like, hey, we would lock in. We need something. And he responded with a ton of deflections over the next couple of games and 11 steals in 2 games. but it's consistency there. And I think they get torched on the perimeter. I think Herter gets exposed at times.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. I mean, the pressure and the resistance along the perimeter, Sam, and I feel like on top of all of that, now we're looking at a league that, you know, just keeps evolving with the way that it shoots the hell out of the basketball. And if you have guys making one mistake, coming under screen, not understanding the personnel, or someone has the hot hand and it's Alec freaking Burks out there along the 3-point line, you know, are you closing him out the right way? Are you running him off the line when he has that hot hand? I feel like all these little things, they keep happening with this Kings team that where there's not any elite individual defenders. So you have to do everything perfect as a team to help one another out to really see that defense complete. And that's why I guess I just don't completely put that blame on Sabonis like so many people around the league want to do.
Yeah, because I think his effort is always there. Like, if there's one thing you know with Sabonis, like, he's going to play hard. He's going to play his ass off. It doesn't matter. Like, even against the Pistons, you're not looking at Sabonis going, hey, he didn't bring it tonight, you know?
No, I mean, his competitiveness is next level. This is a massive reach, admittedly, but I was watching the Kobe Bryant statue unveiling yesterday, and he had, after it, I don't know if you guys saw, NBA TV had a cool documentary on his 81-point game. And he was doing this in his hotel room interview with the legendary Andy Thompson, who people don't realize how awesome this dude is at his job. This is Klay Thompson's uncle, Michael Thompson's brother, who is the GOAT of video documentary folks. He shot The Last Dance, and he was in Kobe's hotel room, right, interviewing him about the 81-point game. And Kobe's talking about that night against Toronto and LA, and how they actually, I think when he got up to 50 or 60, they were still trailing in the game, and that he's like, we just can't lose to this Raptors team, and the competitiveness was on a huge level. All of which is to say, I actually made me think of Sabonis in the Detroit game, where you don't question, like, he actually is an incredibly competitive guy, and he was trying to will his team to win that game. It just didn't work. And, you know, I agree that I'm not pointing the finger at him on many nights, but defense is such a nuanced, mysterious thing. It really is. Like, Milwaukee last night gets smoked. I forget who they played, but they gave up like 128 or something. And Damian Lillard didn't play. And I had a thought there, like, oh, I can't blame Dame tonight. You know, like Giannis out there, Brook Lopez is out there. Now Middleton didn't play either, but you know, that whole 5 guys on a string stuff is real. I don't know what the Kings have to do to fix it, but unfortunately for them, like, this season is going to be sunk if they don't figure that end of the floor out.
That's okay. So do you, after NBA trade deadline, you see the Lakers didn't really do anything. I know the buyout market's coming up, all those things. The Warriors are wherever. Do you still see this Kings team in the Western Conference as a top 6 team?
I think they could be. I mean, top 6 is the perfect framing for it, Morgan, because I mean, if we're going Vegas here, betting man style, like, I'm probably going to say no because of the strength of 5 and 6. And I'm now cheating to look at the standings. I mean, you've got the Mavs, first of all, in the 8th spot, who just got Kyrie Irving back and might get Spencer Dinwiddie. They are a threat. The Pelicans are playing good ball, 1-4 in a row. You know, they're in the 6th spot. The Suns, I think, are going to continue rising, pun intended, and the Kings are going to be fighting to be in that group. So it'll be hard. Could they do it? Sure. You know, again, betting man, I'm going to say no. And I think the truth is about what they should do. I don't know. Like, I hear we are focusing on the defense. I mean, is the answer just recapturing an even greater level of offense like they did last season and taking the ball out of the basket, you know, for the opposing defense more consistently and having your defense be set because you're performing at a higher level offensively? That might be it, honestly. Like, they have not had I don't have it in front of me, but they're nowhere near the offensive ranking they had last year when they led the league, had a historic mark. They have been top half of the league this year, but not elite by any means. So that could be it. You know, get to your better looks more consistently, hit your shots. Defense is always easier when the opponent is having to take that ball out of the basket.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is in some ways there have been better defensive moments from this group this year, but the offense isn't where it was last year. And then around the league, everybody's offense is better. Like the Kings had the number one offensive rating in history. I always thought that was overblown because the Mavs had the number one offensive rating in NBA history the year before that. It's just where things are headed in this league. And now you've got multiple teams in the league who have surpassed what Sacramento did last year offensively. Indiana, Milwaukee. It's crazy to think about that. I just think the defense is, I don't know. It's just going to be up and down because I don't think they have the appropriate personnel. They are banking on a second-year player in Keegan Murray to check some of the best players in the league. That's a lot to ask from him, right? To, hey, go deal with Donovan Mitchell. Go deal with Kawhi, Steph. It's a lot, and I think it's impacted Keegan offensively a bit too. So I think it's going to be a challenge. In some ways, I think you're right. It's the offense needs to be better down the stretch, and they could get that mojo back a little bit because even though their record is around the same as it was at this point last year, it definitely feels different.
So they are 14th in offense right now, and their mark from last year that was the best of all time. This is just wild. I'm sure you guys know this. They 118.6 points per 100 possessions was the mark last year. If that was this year, let's see, what's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Love this.
What did I say the mark was? 118.6?
Yeah.
They would, I think I'm counting this right. I believe they'd be 9th.
That's insane. That's insane.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the league's offense that's a separate conversation. It's at a totally different level right now. They're not a good defensive team, and the offense has dipped.
To build off what you said, Deuce, they don't have they just have this good formula, but it's this somewhat imperfect, flawed formula. Because I love watching Keegan defend.
Yeah.
But then if, Harrison is so inconsistent, even when he does get opportunities. So if Harrison is just not hitting his shots that night, it's a little challenging to tell Keegan, hey, tonight, why don't we just lock in on defense, let the offense take what they give you, but lock in on defense. And then it's like second quarter, hey, HB's 0 for 6. Can we go ahead and pivot here? Keegan, can you start scoring a little more? The roller coaster element is hard. And then within that too, and I don't have these numbers in front of me, but Fox is just not lighting it up from long range like he was early on.
It's dipped big time.
Yeah, and that part matters as you're trying to get your offense to a better level.
Last thing, I think just to sum up this Kings trade deadline and just kind of where they're going, I think they're banking on, in my opinion, where they're comfortable with. I think they tried to make a move, obviously, like you reported, that if they make the playoffs this year, that pick that they owe Atlanta, top 14 protected, conveys. Then it allows them the flexibility to trade the 25, 26, 27, 20. It gives them more options next summer to take a big swing. If there is a big star, maybe they go, you know what, we'll go ahead and throw 3 first and some pick swaps in a player and see if we can get in the running for, I don't know, some star player that somehow becomes available. But now you're going, you better make the playoffs because if that pick does not convey this year, then you're still kind of in this world where you can't move picks as easily as others.
Yeah, no, that's a major priority. And that, I understand the scrutiny about their trade deadline, but that alone for me, if you're a Joe Blow Kings fan or is I'm pretty confident saying that if there was somebody out there that was going to help them get in the playoffs this year, they would have gone ahead and done it. And it's hard to speak on what the market looked like and who was available, but the incentive was there. Now I have heard some sentiment that, hey, listen, if we got to go to plan B, and unfortunately don't get the wrong idea. They want to make the playoffs badly, but that this is not considered a good draft, but there's confidence that, they do their job scouting wise. They can find a good guy, late in the draft, but that's not ideal. You don't want to be doing that. It's a little bit analogous to the Lakers, and they choose to stand pat at this deadline as well. And might have similar opportunities ahead of them this summer as a result. They can trade 3 firsts this summer, and they're basically trying to tell LeBron, like, hey, be patient, even though you're old as dirt. But we can get a star this summer with 3 firsts, and that's kind of their strategy.
Yeah,
and that, but that matters. The Kings have. I will say, man, I get for Kings fans that right now maybe it's frustrating, but just look at Atlanta to learn as a cautionary tale what it looks like when you jump too early, when you make the move too quick. The DeJounte Murray trade 2 years ago was a bad mistake. And they now, I mean, really, if I asked you right now, what is Trae Young's legacy going to be in Atlanta in terms of the track that it is currently on? A lot of fun highlights, but if I like, does anybody expect him to contend in Atlanta? Because really, they jumped too early, and DeJounte wasn't the guy, and now they're almost being stubborn, not wanting to give him up because they're not getting enough back. Now your timelines are off. Now your building roster-wise is off. There's the Kings still have a lot of powder available to them, and then right now they just got to make what they can of this season.
Patience is important at times.
It's so hard, though.
I know.
Especially in this era.
Know.
Sam, we appreciate the time as always, man. And I'm sure we'll be seeing you soon.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
The one and only Sam Amick.
Deuce and Mo. Deuce and Mo. Deuce and Mo. They tell you what they know. Deuce and Mo. Deuce and Mo. Deuce and Mo. The podcast that you know.